recycle bin until you empty the recycle bin, and then it's deleted. And when it deletes that, it does not put the name back, so it's just deleted as DD001 or whatever. So that file just disappears. So you don't know how to look for cat.doc anymore. So you have to go to the info2 file in binary and read it. And it'll tell you it used to be cat.doc file and what the number is and where the drive came from. And then you have to go find DC001. So there's a process there for deleted before and deleted after, but it's never really deleted till the trash can's emptied. You can hold down the shift key on a Windows machine and hit delete, and it does not go to the trash. It's gone. It gets deleted, the MFT gets a mark, and then it'll be an MFT entry in there. So this item and the recover deleted files box is the refiles that the MFT still has an entry for that has not been shuffled off to Buffalo. Okay? So if it is marked deleted, it will try. It will not necessarily be successful. It'll find a name, it'll find a date and a time, and it thinks the data over here is still good and maybe not reused by something else, and it will recover that deleted file and try to recreate something that you have to then go through. Allow duplicate file names is because Microsoft repeats names when you open Word documents, and temp files have multiple names. You have an old file that used to be cat.doc, but it got renamed, and then it got renamed again and deleted, and then so you'll have duplicate files in that process, and you'll have to look at all of those. So most of the time these two boxes are a waste of time because the client wants back what he really had. So he doesn't want his deleted files, and he doesn't want to look through every duplicate file name. Now, I'm not saying there's not a time you want to do that, because if the original file is damaged, then you may want to look at the duplicate files to see if any of those are still at least mostly good. Like if he's writing a book and it's 500 pages, and the original book is now damaged and you can't read 500 pages, maybe the old book had 500 and or 499 pages, and so maybe he'll be happy with that. Does that make sense? But most of the time, the answer is no. These are going to take more time, so I would uncheck them. Right? The next one, raw file recovery. What is a raw file recovery?
Carving.
It's what?
Carving.
Carving. A raw file recovery would be, I have a pile of headers for every piece of software that ever existed. And it's a long list. RStudios has got a list of like 400 and something thousand files or something that's ridiculous. It's a long list, hundreds and hundreds of files, and it will carve the header for every one. So look for FFD8, it'll look for Word documents, look for Excel documents, it'll look for every single one of them, and it'll take forever. And you have to touch every cluster. You have to check every cluster to see if any of them match. Does that make sense? Those are unallocated space. Those are, and it may give you a good result of some things that the client doesn't want, but most of the time if they want their allocated files, they do not want raw deleted files, unallocated space. Understand, Tim? Good? So that will waste my time and touch every sector that I do not need to touch. So I will turn that off. Make sense? This is where the ATA commands come in. If you have a bad sector, this will now also talk directly through ATA commands and try to recover. And so I usually just let it ask me, and then I can change it later to whatever I want. All right, so let's talk about this one. The Mft options. So if you do not check them, it does one thing. If you do check them, you get a different result. So if I check use valid Mft only, what is a valid and an invalid MFT? What would you think it is? When is an MFT invalid? And when is it valid?
That's the first four primary, I don't know, going by the MFT copy.
I mean, at least, guessing's fine. I mean, that's fine. So those are for redundancy in case it fails. So technically, it should still always be valid, right? But there is a unique scenario that happens that you have valid and invalid entries. And so when would you have a valid or an invalid? Let's say you had an MFT entry, just as a quick example, as you're looking at your drive, so your MFT is basically a sequential list of entries. And from here to here would be valid. From here to here is invalid. Those are another MFT entries. How do we have a valid entry and invalid entries? How do we get invalid entries?
Corrupt files, or corrupt file name, or?
No, if you get a corrupt file name and then the sequence number doesn't match, then it'll just erase the file. So that's still even here. Like it'll still kill it even there. Right? So when do you have these?
Deleted files?
Not deleted, close though.
Or orphaned?
Not orphaned. What's your other option?
Sparse.
Overwritten, or you reformatted your hard drive. So you had an MFT on your drive. You reformatted your hard drive. When it recreates the MFT entry, it tracks the size of the MFT. So originally it used to be an MFT with 493 entries. Now you've reformatted it, it recreates an MFT entry, but now with only 400 entries. So now you have a new MFT entry on a newly formatted drive that just has a Windows directory and program files, and you just installed it, and then you go, oh my God, my PST file is not here. I did not copy it. Oh my God, I need this back. So now that is now in the invalid MFT entries because only valid ones exist in the current operating system. Invalid ones existed in the previous copy. So they are abandoned by the MFT and they still sit there and they are now invalid. Does that make sense? So a reformatted hard drive, you would have valid and invalid. It's only valid because there's something called the data delimiter. So you have a data delimiter for every entry and it says how many entries it has. And so you have a smaller subset in that process. So these are valid. So if I reformatted my hard drive and I check the box that says only give me valid entries, then it means for the current installed operating system. If you say give me invalid entries, it does them all. It says, okay, I'm done with this one. Now I also want all of the other records that were deleted that may still exist, rebuild me. Because they're not flagged deleted anymore. That's not part of the current file system. Does that make sense? So in thinking about that process, it's super rare I'd want use valid only. The valid only would mean I didn't reformat my hard drive, so maybe I only want these current ones and no other allocated ones from any previous existing copy. So you have to make a judgment call on that, what you want or you don't want. And then the last one, which you can probably guess I asked them for. It's called Quick Scan. You know what Quick Scan does? If you knew it was me and you knew that I'm going to be as quick and as fast as I possibly could, what would I want? I don't care anything about any of these other things. I want them all to be off. All I want is for you to rebuild me $MFT. I want to skip everything else. I just want you to give me every single record that says file and index. Give them all to me. So that's what it does. When you check this box, the entire thing, instead of that whole big tree, because everything else that's checked will give you that big long tree and run and touch every single sector. This one neuters all of them. So this button does it. So open up the options on your copy and change all of those so that you only get Quick Scan and nothing else. So uncheck all the others and do that. Everybody ready? Then click OK. And now you should be highlighting the image that we're going to be working on. And now we've set all of our options. You ready? So watch what happens. Click Next. It did not spend the year building the tree or doing anything. All it did was identify the existing MFT entries. It created me a custom version of an MFT by finding and carving just MFT entries, nothing else. Everybody happy with this idea? Yeah.
So the Quick Scan Only went through valid MFT?
It did them all. Every entry, if I had checked only valid, it will stop there. I actually can't say I've tested that variation with it checked because I want them all. So when you check the box, it just says quick scan and uncheck everything else. It identifies the beginning location of all the MFT entries, counts all the MFT entries, and every file record that goes together. And so if I had let like a whole scan happen with all the files, it would compare the MFT entries, and I'd get like real files versus MFT entries, and it would do like a 78% comparison because I would have some that match and some that don't, some that exist in the MFT, some that are unallocated. Now here's the cool thing. After I've done this and I got this entry, they made a button for me at the top, Explorer. You see the button? Guess what that does? It takes the image I'm working on and the metadata it just created and passes them in memory to Disk Explorer. So all you got to do is click the button. After you've done that, 10 seconds later, bam, all the stuff that did not work in the other tool, now all of it comes back because now it found the MFT entries, and so I have the entire set of records. You can tell it passed it in memory. It passed quick scan to Disk Explorer, which we had tried earlier. It passed it immediately to it, and now I have all my records. And here's the cool thing. So I'm going to expand the box so you can see how big it is. I don't have to do anything else to get to my data except switch to the root directory. So now the root directory that I could not get to before because the bootloader was screwed up, you hit the go to menu, it now knows the root directory. And we are now inside of the DD image for a damaged process. So if you click on root directory, you will now notice, so the imaginary person is Mark Basinger. Mark Basinger sends me a hard drive, and Mark Basinger wants his user folder back. So find the Mark Basinger folder. Mark Basinger's user folder. Where will it be? Everybody find him yet? Find him, Tim? Find him? So, if you were on a Mac, where are the user folders? In Windows, we have two. We now have the same name you have. We have users folders, so we have users, but we didn't for years. We had documents and settings, which was a nightmare with spaces in it for us to type every time we went in. Like I was like, who thought that up? That was documents and settings, a long file name for a folder structure for the user. So documents and settings is the old one, which is XP. And after XP in Vista, we now have users is the correct folder, just like on a Mac, just like on Linux. So Linux also sometimes calls them the home directory. So they'll add them as home. So documents and settings is the folder. So you come down here and you find documents and settings. And you click on that. And then in there, you will now find one called, well, we'll find one called Mark Basinger. So see Mark Basinger right there? So if you look at Mark Basinger, there's no highlight button. So if you go all the way to the right and you go to the save and find, just hover for a second, when you find the save button, you'll see the full name Mark Basinger. Don't do the short name, but we're going to recover Mark Basinger's folder. Okay? So if you come over to Mark Basinger and you hit save, then this box will pop up. Okay? Now, you don't want to save it in the directory that they are giving you a representation of. I also want to do subfolders, so the very first thing I do is say include subdirectories. And then the next thing I'm going to do is change this folder's name. Now here's the thing. I would normally number mine. So I have a server somewhere And so I don't recommend obviously copying to a local hard drive on the local machine, but at least, you know, it would have been an external hard drive and you would be copying it to wherever you have storage space to save. So I would do like this, C:, and I would make a short directory called RV. And here's the reason I use such a short name. RV to me stands for recovery. When you are storing folders from someone else's hard drive, they can be 255 characters long, and you have a limit to the quantity of nested folders. So when you have a folder and a folder and a folder, there is a spot where it will say, I can no longer store subfolders because they are too long for my ability to store them. I think it's 8 depths. If they're full 255, I think it's 8. So I make a short 2 characters to save the shortest possible solution, and then usually just the number that I'm using to recover, so that if they are long directories, that I know just that one. So then I would have had this, and I would have said the number of the drive that we have labeled. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. After I'm done, I might rename them, but whatever that number would have been the shortest possible answer. Then once you have that, you can click OK, and it'll make the directories for you. And then you'll have that data. So this is actually extracting Mark Basinger's folder, and I can see it as it happens. Like if I go to RV, and so if you guys did it, I got 1, 2, 3, blah, blah, blah. And now this is now it rebuilding Mark Basinger's folder right now as we go. So as it refreshes, you'll see more and more data as it gets in there. So it's in one of these folders counting data, and you'll see it. See, you can see it increasing. And I am actually clicking that button to make it refresh like that. You could hit F5, and but it won't do the calculation for the size of the folder. So I'm doing the size of the folders. So you can see it's in this directory dumping data. Does that make sense to everybody? And this is what I give back to the client. So I've actually then on the fly. Now, I know it seemed like a long time for us to get to that spot, but in real life, if I'm doing this in real life, I'm only checking something. I check it, oh, that doesn't work. I learned something, now I go to the next thing, I learn the next thing, now I pass this data back. And so I can use my tools to get that far in, or I can use a hex editor to parse the data, or I can now go see what's in the MFT. Now here's the other thing I need to tell you. Not as important for data recovery for us people just trying to get the files back and give them to my client, but for you forensics people, I'm going to tell you right now, if you've got a situation like that where you may have done something to get to the MFT entries, you need to save $MFT, because $MFT is now the record of the original dates and times, because what happens to these dates and times as I export them to my local drive?
Modified.
Yep, they'll be modified and changed, and it's really a new entry. It's not even just modified and changed. It makes an entry in my MFT, and my MFT takes the data from those entries and then adds them into my MFT, and so it is a new MFT record. But if and I'm going to just stop this because I don't need to keep doing this, but if I go back to the root, so I go back here, here's what I would do. There's the $MFT. I come across $MFT. It's literally just a figment of my imagination because they take all the binary data and combine it together into a file. I'm going to save this, take the dollar off, and don't save it in the root of your drive. If you do save it in your drive and you are successful, your drive's directory structure will look like Mark Basinger's directory structure, and it will no longer function on your laptop. It's pretty hilarious when it works. But otherwise, so I do exactly the same thing. I'd say, okay, C:/RV/123/4, whatever it is I have, and then just MFT. I just save that there, say okay, it'll go read the MFT, and it'll spit that out. And now in that drive, in that directory, I now have an MFT, right? And this is what it looks like. It literally will be in hex, the header information for every file, so file 0, file 0, file 0, right? All the way down through the end of every file I own. Here's what you can do with it. There are a couple of programs that convert MFTs into Excel databases, Excel spreadsheets. And there is one on this laptop that was approved by the person who made it. I'm just going to shrink these windows down so you can see. I have a tool, it's called Mft Ripper. And if I execute Mft Ripper, I can go find the MFT. And so it's not an actual lab. The whole point was just I can do this, and then I can output to...
Wouldn't be Harlan, would it?
No. No, I'm trying to remember. It's the brother. There's two brothers that made Right Blocker.
Oh, okay.
Who claimed that they made the first right blocker that ever existed. So MyKey technology. Gosh, I'm trying to remember what their names were. It's been a few years since I've had to talk to him, but he gave me the rights to use this on the machine, and I don't know if they even still sell it, but there are other tools, like Andy Rosen has a grep Ripper or something, and so he has one. But you can always take the $MFT and throw it on a fake drive, and then just process it in case or FTK at this point. So you could make the same thing happen in minutes, but this will produce a report basically. So so now you can do mft.csv, and then it'll convert this file into an actual spreadsheet basically. So a comma delimited file when it's eventually done. Come on, come on, come on. Okay, so now it's done, and then I go back to the folder, and now I've got the CSV file, and so you can see now it's converted all the data, and it'll open up in an Excel spreadsheet if I had Excel on here, and every column would be filled with the data for that drive. Does that make sense? Everybody good? But either way, you don't have to do that for the dude who's on the other side of the case. You just give him MFT. You let him figure it out. It's always hilarious when they ask, like, oh, you don't know how to open the MFT? What's up with that? I don't understand. So, or you can process it in X ways to do it. So anyway, so this is the whole process that I'm going through. I'm doing everything I can to get that data out. So if I have to do this, I don't have a deep spar, I was on vacation in another country, somebody had a problem. This really happens more than you think it should. I've been on vacation in Florida, didn't even bring any equipment or anything with me, and get a phone call and somebody went missing. And so I'm starting a case, and I'm working on a case, and I worked on a case for 5 days while I was on vacation of a missing person to try to find her. And I put out all kinds of stuff. I used my tracking tools for emails, for cell phones, for every single thing I could do to try to figure out where she was and email her. And unfortunately, she turned up perished 5 days later. She had killed herself. But, you know, you never know when you're going to get that call. And that's why I was working on it, because she was missing and, you know, somebody's worried about her. So, so you do the best you can. I've worked on way more cases than I would want to say about suicide. Anyway, so this is some of the stuff that you can do to get around the problems. I'm just trying to show you. Now back to where we were. If you're still here, you can walk through and fix this. There's also some other tools inside of this tool, just to point out. There is one tool that they have that if you do this job this way, you will fix a drive that is damaged that you can spec back out as a real working drive. It will kind of repair and build a virtual machine, virtual volume out of this drive, and it's called Create a Virtual Volume. And when it's done rebuilding a cycle like that, you can fix or run and rebuild a drive that can't be accessed any other way. And my point being this is, again, in a forensic situation where you're passing something on, I've had some of these that were damaged you could never repair or get to any other way, that were like voicemail mailboxes and things like that, where I've worked on servers, and it was the only way to get to the data. And so I just have to export everything that I would have used in forensics to recreate that scenario to try to explain it in court, what that is. So it is a non-forensics tool that I'm using for a forensics purpose in order to rebuild that process. Does that make sense? So there are a lot of things in the tools that can do this. A lot of other tools would have just processed some of this data, like get data back, might not have been able to do it in the tool specifically where I was dealing with it. I just don't like to touch so many sectors on an original drive without copying it. So I'm trying to limit how many sectors I'm talking to and then repair it on the fly if I can. Everybody happy with that? Okay. All right, so now, even though runtime passed this to this tool, if you close this tool but leave the other one open, so the get data back one right here, is it still open? If you leave that one open, close this one, the Disk Explorer, you'll see that after they did the quick scan, it's limited in what you get, but in quick scan, if I hit next, it would have processed a tree. I would not get all the capabilities and the data that I would have had in the other tool. But if you hit next, you'll see it will virtually build this tree without touching the rest of your file system, just like I didn't crawl through and rebuild Word documents. This only processed the MFT, and so it only touched the $MFT in order to build this tree. So there is a way around tools. I mean, some tools can't do it. Some tools will just always look at every single sector on the drive. And they only added this because I asked for it, and then I got this tree. So I've got a tree that I can export data from. It is not as fully versed as all the other stuff in the rest of the file system I saw in Disk Explorer, because that stuff included unallocated and other things I could do. I'm only going to be accessing real live files from the MFT entries themselves. That's it. Okay? Here's another thing that happens, and you may not see it here. If you have a hard drive that is reformatted, Incase won't do this. Incase does not correctly do this process. If you have a hard drive that is reformatted and then a new operating system is installed, it will select the invalid MFT entries and put them back in the tree of a valid tree. It automatically finds the file and the folder and sticks it back in the valid tree. If you do it in data recovery software, they do not assume that it belongs in the tree. They know the parent number is wrong and it doesn't belong to this orphan, so they will give you two directories. You don't see it here now, but if you do one that's reformatted, you will have two documents and settings folders. And if you have two documents and settings folders, one was because of a reformat. And so if you extract them both, you will get two completely different sets of entries. Incase does not do that, and you can actually validate or invalidate the Incase discovery through the documents and settings process in a piece of software like this in data recovery, because you can see the grouping that belongs for these users. There will be a second one, and it'll have a whole second set of users. And those users belong in one, and the others, and it'll do that for everything. It'll do it for the program folder, the program files directory, and everything else. So you get two of them. One doesn't belong to the current one. One belongs to the previously formatted one. So if you see those, that's what happened. Good? Everybody happy? Okay. All right, so let's take it's about to go off here in a second. Let's take a 10-minute break here, and then we will move on to the next portion.